Imagine having your future ripped away in a single, gut-wrenching moment. My best friend, with her husband and 5 kids, had spent 5 years saving every single dollar, every last cent, to finally buy the rundown rental they called home. Then, with the stroke of a pen, or rather the death of a kind old lady, their dream was shattered. The house, their home, was now in the hands of 4 greedy, arrogant heirs who saw not a family's future, but a chance to make a quick buck. They tried to steal an extra $80,000 from a family who had nothing. But what they didn't know? I had a plan involving rotten eggs, a head of boiled cabbage, and a few dozen very large, very intimidating men. What happened next wasn't just revenge. It was a masterclass in chaotic justice. If you've ever felt the burning desire for vindication, if you've ever had a plan for poetic justice slowly form in your mind, then this is the story for you. Hit that subscribe button and become part of our community where the wicked never go unpunished. Like this video, and let's dive into a tale of righteous fury and a perfectly executed, stinking hot plan. 15 years ago, in a city where every square foot came with a shocking price tag, my best friend, let's call her Sarah, and her husband Mark were just trying to survive. They had 5 kids, and their entire lives were a tightrope walk between affording a home and simply existing. Their solution was an old 4-bedroom house, a place that looked more like it was melting than aging. The kitchen was a horror show of old stained countertops and leaky faucets. The drains stank like something had crawled inside and died. But at $400 a week, it was a lifeline. It was a home. The owner was a lovely, wealthy old woman who, for some reason, had taken a real shine to Sarah. For 5 years, she froze their rent, never raising it, a silent act of charity that meant the world to a struggling family. She saw how hard they worked and how they loved that messy, beat-up house. And then she made them a promise. When they were ready, when they had saved enough to get a loan, she would sell them the house at a fair price. They had heard of her doing this for others, and they trusted her completely. For 5 long years, they lived with a single, burning purpose: save, save, save. They ate cheap, wore hand-me-downs, and put every spare cent into their savings account. When the day finally came, they called her, their voices trembling with excitement. "We're ready," they told her. 2 days later, she was gone. She passed away in her sleep, leaving behind a legacy of kindness and a handful of properties, including Sarah and Mark's home. She also left behind 4 children. 4 very wealthy, very entitled children. The first conversation with the heirs was a reassurance. "Don't worry," they said, their voices dripping with fake compassion. "We'll honor our mother's wishes. The sale will go through, just as planned." And for a while it seemed like they would. Sarah and Mark, filled with hope, started making changes. They stripped away decades-old garish wallpaper, revealing clean plaster beneath. They started painting the living room, imagining their kids growing up surrounded by colors they had chosen themselves. This wasn't just a house anymore, it was theirs. They were putting their sweat, their hope into making it a true home. Then the probate cleared. The heirs called. The lawyers were ready. Sarah and Mark put in their application for the bank loan, confident and full of joy. But a few days later, the bank called back. The loan was rejected. A cold, heavy stone of dread formed in Sarah's stomach. The bank representative explained it calmly, impersonally. The asking price for the house had been raised. Not by a little bit. By $80,000. The family who had worked for 5 years to scrimp and save now found themselves staring into an abyss. The heirs had lied, right to their faces. The house, their sanctuary, would be put on the open market in just 7 days. The injustice was a physical blow. Sarah's call to me was filled with the sounds of her barely contained sobs, the echo of her devastation. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust, about a promise made and then broken with callous disregard. They didn't just move the goalposts, they had built a new stadium and put the goal on the moon. And the worst part? The new asking price was still well within the means of plenty of buyers in that rich city. The house would sell instantly, and Sarah and Mark would be out of a home. With rents skyrocketing since their last adjustment, they would be utterly screwed. They couldn't afford to rent anywhere else big enough for their family. I hung up the phone, feeling an anger so pure and white-hot, it felt like it might melt my bones. My hands were shaking. These people, these trust fund babies, were already so wealthy they could drown in cash, yet they were willing to crush a struggling family for an extra $20,000 each. This wasn't a business decision. It was pure, unadulterated greed. It was a cold act of cruelty. And in that moment, as Sarah's tears echoed in my mind, my anger transformed. It became a sharp, precise tool. They had chosen to fight dirty, to screw over good people for the fun of it. Fine. Two could play at that game. While Sarah and Mark scrambled to find a way to get a new loan, I started plotting. My plan was simple in its core and beautiful in its execution. We had 1 week to make that house look like the worst investment in the history of real estate without making Sarah and Mark look like bad tenants. We needed to create a sense of chaos and undesirability that would send potential buyers running for the hills. I started my research. What makes a house feel unappealing? Overcluttering, bad smells, and a sense of a nightmare neighborhood. The plan was born.
First, the clutter. The open house needed to feel suffocatingly small and messy. We moved every piece of furniture away from the walls and into the middle of the rooms, making the space feel cramped and awkward. We borrowed every piece of spare furniture, every weird statue, every gaudy ornament our friends had lying around. The final touch? Mark's extensive collection of vintage motorcycle memorabilia. We hung posters of choppers and old motorbikes on every available wall space. The house no longer felt lived in, it felt like a cluttered, claustrophobic bachelor pad. Next, the smell. This was the masterstroke, the piece de resistance. We needed a combination of smells that would simultaneously make visitors gag and wonder what was terribly, irrevocably wrong with the place. Sarah boiled an entire head of cabbage on the stove for hours, filling the house with a sickly sweet, rotten odor. We took 24 eggs, cracked them open into a bucket, and let them ferment in the sun for a few days until they were gloriously, nauseatingly rotten. Then we poured that vile concoction down the drains, the same drains that already had a reputation for smelling like a sewer. Finally, for good measure, we sprayed ammonia around the front and back doors. The effect was immediate and stunning. The place smelled like a combination of a stale diner, a barnyard, and a litter box. With the house itself taken care of, we moved on to the neighborhood. This part of the plan required the most help, and it was a true testament to the power of community. First, with permission from the neighbor across the street, we went to the local dump and dragged back a truly hideous, moldy, stained old couch and dropped it in their front yard, right where it could be seen from the street. The next part was even better. I called up everyone I knew with the loud, rattly car. I told them to drive by the house slowly with their windows down and their music blaring all day. The street, which was normally quiet and residential, suddenly looked like a busy commuter road. Cars full of friends kept driving by, slowing down as they passed the house, creating a sense of constant, distracting noise. But the real show was next door. I called up my old rugby club. If you've never seen a rugby player, imagine a group of men who are a cross between a freight train and a grizzly bear, with a penchant for loud jokes and even louder clothing. I asked them for a favor and they answered the call with gusto. We had a neighbor who was in on the plan, and he set up his barbecue in his front yard. We provided cheap beer and plenty of burgers and told them to come on over. The open house day was a blur of righteous chaos. As potential buyers arrived, they were greeted by the sight of a dozen or so very large men in their grungiest gear, some with motorcycles parked on the curb, drinking beer and laughing. The smell of barbecue mixed with the stench of the sewer drains and boiled cabbage. Inside the house, people were in and out in minutes, their faces scrunched up in disgust. One woman just sat in her car and watched the party next door for a few minutes before driving away, her expression a mix of confusion and revulsion. Only one potential buyer, a man I'll call brave buyer, stayed for more than a few minutes. He was bold enough to approach one of my rugby mates who was leaving the party to go to the bathroom. He asked if the noise and the crowds were a regular thing. My friend, a natural actor, put on his best slurred speech act. "Oh yeah, mate, this is nothing. We have these parties all the time. Last night's party was 3 houses down and it went all night." As the brave buyer's face fell, my friend added, "And don't even get me started on the drains here. Always getting backed up with tree roots. Stinks like hell." The brave buyer thanked him, his shoulders slumped, and walked back to his car. He left without making an offer. And that's how it happened. At the end of the day, Sarah and Mark were the only people who had put in an offer. They still had to pay more than they had originally planned, but it was far less than the $80,000 markup the heirs had demanded. With the signed papers and the deposit, they were now the rightful owners. When the brave buyer finally did get his courage back and put in an offer the next day, an offer for $30,000 more than what Sarah and Mark had agreed to, it was too late. Strict anti-gazumping laws meant the greedy heirs couldn't back out of the deal. The house was no longer theirs to sell. I would have paid anything to see the look on their faces when they found out, to know that their greed had not only been thwarted, but had actually cost them money. They had been outsmarted by a boiling head of cabbage, a few rotten eggs, and a bunch of very large, very loyal friends. The day the papers were signed, Sarah and Mark called me. Their voices weren't filled with relief, but with a bubbling, joyous laughter. They were cleaning up the mess, scrubbing the stench of ammonia and rotten eggs from the floors, but they didn't care. The house was theirs. This was a victory against pure malice, a triumph of friendship over greed. The heirs were left with nothing but a bitter taste in their mouths and the knowledge that they had been outplayed in the most absurdly public way possible. Justice wasn't just served, it was marinated in vengeance and served cold. This story isn't just about an old house or a family struggle, it's a testament to the fact that money can't buy everything, and that the best revenge isn't a simple act of harm, but an act of strategic, poetic, and utterly hilarious justice. Sometimes the most powerful weapon you have is the love and support of the people around you. If this story gave you a rush of satisfaction, smash that like button. Tell me in the comments below, what's the most clever or satisfying act of revenge you've ever heard of? And for more incredible stories of poetic justice, make sure you're subscribed. See you in the next video.